gonna be a fun one. It's gonna be a good one. Today we're talking tuning. 550, 600, and 650 performance point tunes for the Shelby GT350R. Let's get started. Hello everyone, Imposter here. Welcome back to, as promised, a tuning video on the Shelby GT350R. As I mentioned in my last video, I was going to show you guys how to tame this thing, which might sound a little counterintuitive, being the old school kind of rear wheel drive muscle car formula. Seems like it might be hard to do, and it kind of was a little bit. I'm kind of proud of these tunes, honestly. That took a little bit of finagling to get this thing to behave, but I think I did it, and I'll let you guys be the judge. We're going to look at a few different tunes for it, show you the stock tune. I know I went over some of this in my previous video, but for those who are new, we're just going to kind of wipe the slate, focus fully on this thing today, because it's really capable. It's a great car once you learn kind of its little sensitive areas and finesse it and massage it. And we're not talking about cars anymore, are we? Anyway, we're just gonna, we're gonna jump into it here. We are going again to Trial Mountain, because I mentioned it is a great test course, a good trial, if you will. Mainly I like it because it has a bunch of elevation changes, and I think that that's a really good test for a car, for its balance. Let's go morning, why not? So yeah, we're gonna start with this thing in stock form. Stock form, it's squirrely and hard to control, and I hate it. And I'll show you why. And maybe if you've ever driven it, you can chime in and tell me what you think in the comments, because I think it's just... But here we go. I will be as unbiased as possible. No assist, check to control off. Only thing I use is ABS. Try and give you the most raw perspective of this thing as possible, which isn't too hard considering its muscle car nature. But yeah, I love the powertrain in this car. Loves to rev out. You can easily keep it in a higher gear if you want. Start around 4,000 RPMs and rev it all the way out. Plenty of different ways to drive this car, but it's just tough in stock form. Whoa. It's too stiff, which we will address. The differential is much too tight, which we will address. And yeah, anti-roll bars are a little tight also. I don't really know. They kind of just treated this like a race car. It's not a race car. It's a heavy muscle car with a lot of weight over the front axle, and you could feel that. And it's they're like trying to disguise it in this tune or something, but it just makes your life harder when you drive it. And it understeers when it shouldn't. I know it has sports hard tires, but it shouldn't have sports hard tires. This car, in real life, when you bought it, I don't know if it was an optional extra, but I think in R form, it automatically came with Pilot Super Sports or Sport Cup 2s, one of the two. Either way, a grippy tire. And I don't think they're sports hard tires. I think they're at least sports medium. And that makes a big difference in this kind of car. Because, we're coming up to a big braking zone here, and luckily the brakes are very good in stock form. That's one thing I can say they did a nice job with, because it does have big Brembo brakes as standard, but it just feels like the rest of it doesn't match all that well. And if you go too close to the throttle, like I have been, I'm really not even pushing that hard, and you can see how easily this thing just wants to step out, dance away from you in the turns, and then you lose your control. So, I mean, yeah, you can see there. I'm really not trying to push this thing to show you like, ooh, this thing's super squirrely. I'm just kind of driving right now. But anyway, we'll do a lap here, and I'll show you my preliminary tune. It was a 550 tune that I did on this thing. It actually detuned it from the stock performance point level. Oh man, if I ever cross the finish line. And I did that just because it obviously has plenty of straight line speed, even if you detune it, but the corners are where something like this comes alive. So, let's take a look here. We'll start over. 230, terrible time around that track, spun out like 19 times. Definitely going to need to address that, and we're going to do so with the tune. So you can see, even going down a performance level to 550 from 574, I was still able to put sports medium tires on it. So take a look here. Just a tick below 550 on this one. Obviously, change the tires. We have the height adjustable sports suspension here, and you'll notice I actually raised it up a little bit from its stock height. Just because, as I mentioned, the car has a lot of weight, and it does help to give it a little bit more suspension travel, since I softened up the springs as well. You got to kind of manage ride height so that you're not scraping and inhibiting your steering. So compression and expansion went down just one click. Same with the spring stiffness. So those are the main suspension mods there. And then the next one is your differential, fully customizable. Turn these way down. Acceleration sensitivity, I think is at 40 stock. It's way too high. That's part of why this thing just steps out on you every chance it gets. So 10 is nice because it still allows a little bit, but allows you to get on the power much earlier. Next up, I think it was just ballast and power restrictor, and I think that was it for this part of the tune. So this has 72 kilograms. I put this, you'll notice, mostly towards the back. So effectively, like if it was in the trunk, to kind of weight the rear axle a little bit, because there isn't much over the rear axle. I think it helps to balance it a little bit. But you can play around with that. Ballast, obviously, you don't necessarily need it. You can turn the power restrictor down and have more ballast, or the other way around. Something to play around with. But I found this kind of works out pretty nicely. There's a good feel to it. And then power at 73, which allows you 383 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much, but yeah, you'll see. It does behave pretty well. And as you can see, everything else over here is stock, completely stock. So suspension, differential, ballast, and power restrictor, and tires. That's what 550 consists of. Let's take it for a lap here. I love this tune for how turnable it is. It just makes this car so much more responsive. And the sports medium tires really help to give you a little bit more grip all around. Obviously, the grip mostly comes from your right foot not digging into the car so quickly. But yeah, this is going to be much better behaved, especially with these elevation changes. So when it steps out on you a little bit like that, you have a lot more control. It's much easier to control oversteer. It doesn't get away from you so quickly. You can counteract it easily. Under braking, it's a little bit more stable. It didn't stabilize too much, but it is still heavy in the front regardless. But take a look at, that wasn't the best example of it, take a look at how much less steering input is needed for this tune overall, based on, comparatively to the last one. It's just much easier, much smoother to drive. It doesn't feel like it's fighting you so much. And I thought that was key with this thing, because it feels like every muscle car in this game, front engine, rear wheel drive, is a hassle, really. They don't have to be. This thing is pretty darn good in a setup like this. And obviously, coming up to this turn here, we have slightly rear tires. So, conservative braking point there, but just goes to show you, with the really good stock brakes and better rubber, much more easily controlled. And again, with the differential being unlocked a little more, it allows you to keep your foot down over crest like this, whereas otherwise it would try and spin the wheels because it's too tight with its settings. So, and then again like that as well, with slight oversteer, you can still be on the power while correcting the oversteer to allow you to get more power out of the turn. So I've always thought that that was a very hard characteristic to achieve in a muscle car, and it kind of is, but not impossible, clearly. So that's just a quick look at 550. There are other cars, you could use for the 550 performance range. It might be better than this one, but I just wanted to show you what it's like to go backwards from a stock tune, because it's possible, and I recommend it actually with lots of cars. It does work well for this one. So yeah, 550. Next is 600. We kept a lot of the things the same. Skip over the replay there. Car settings, 600. So one step up on the tires. We're at Sports Soft now. Same suspension settings as it was before. Slightly softer springs. Slightly different on the camber as well. And then I adjusted the braking sensitivity on the differential, but this is up to you again. Braking sensitivity is not quite as important in my mind as initial torque and acceleration. So play around with braking. I'll leave that one up to you. No power restrictor, some ballast, and then I think that was it. So it's mostly, a big chunk of this upgrade is the Sports Soft tires. That really helps, and then we're taking all the power restrictor away, so back up to 525. Ready to go. So a little faster on the straights here, obviously. And the grippier our tires get, the more fun this car gets, to be honest. And obviously that applies to a lot of different cars, but this feels really planted now, with just those, even the smallest of suspension setting changes. It's all it needed. It just makes me wonder why they didn't do it in the first place, but either way, I have saved the day. We can all rejoice. Braking on this tune's a little better, just because grippier tires. That helps keep the back end in check. That's where braking sensitivity on the differential comes in handy as well. You can control a little bit about how the back end feels using that. The ballast does play into how the tail moves around as well, which is why I say that's something you can mess around with. You get used to it. It does feel a little bit different, but definitely something you can get used to pretty quickly in the sense of various tracks and such. And then yes, obviously much faster on the straights. We're going at least 20 miles an hour faster there compared to 550. You can see through that whole turn I was able to keep my foot into the power, which is what you want with this car, because if you're at a 600 performance point level, likely you're racing with four-wheel drive cars as well, and they can obviously get on the power much earlier without much to worry about. So that was the idea here, being able to do that without having to snap your steering wheel back and correct for it. And that alone, I think, is a huge improvement to this car based on its general characteristics. So as you can see, much grippier through the turns, faster in and out, and faster on the straights. 600 is a very good medium for this car. I think a good 25-point performance point upgrade has done this car very well. So a good 8 seconds faster for a lap that, is paying attention for, but also not paying attention for. Just kind of showing you general characteristics here. Lastly, 650, which I think is kind of as far as I'd want to go with this one, before you start tacking on a lot of power, and this is one where I was debating leave it on Sports Soft or go to Racing Hard, because you might be restricted to Sports Soft in some of the events, but you can switch to Sports Soft. It's just going to take a little bit more finesse with the throttle, but if you can, go to Racing Hard for this one. So a lot of the same suspension stuff, as I mentioned. Toe is adjusted here with the anti-roll bars, since we have fully customized suspension here. Differential, I actually turned the acceleration sensitivity down even farther. Since we have more power now, you'll notice I supercharged this tune. So that makes for even more torque, even more opportunity for it to try and drift on you when you're not even trying to do that. There is some ballast. The racing tires jump the performance points quite a bit. So that's why there's a small ballast, small power restriction. And yeah, over here we have the supercharger to help with power, and then racing discs to help stop the thing. And I didn't change the brake pads because I didn't really think it needed it. The racing discs are very capable as is. I don't think there's any need for ceramic, anything like that. This is a very nice medium for this power level. Right now we are at 583. So effectively about 50 more horsepower. It goes up to 615 as no restriction goes for this setup. But you'll see here, it's quite speedy. And very fun to drive in this setup, I have to say. With these tires, it's just a great machine. And you can brake really late into braking zones. And of course, monsters down the straight. It's just, it flies. I'll try not to spin out here. I haven't spent too much time back with this thing at 650 farm. But you can see, it's very easy to transition, which isn't usually the case with muscle cars. But I made it a goal for tracks like this, so you can actually handle it. As you can see there, I braked way too early. I could have waited to brake, but got skittish. And with this setup, even with racing hard tires, it does get a little more, oops, I tried to say here. A little more picky about the rear end, just because the racing hard tires have such a hefty bite, I guess. In any sense, racing tires in general are hard to recover from a drift if you get in that. So it's best to avoid that. That is why I turned the differential sensitivity down as well. But you can see how much speed I was able to take into that corner there. And I could have braked actually even a little bit later than I did to truly maximize that straightaway. Yeah, again, you can see that I'm getting on the power much earlier in these turns. In and out. You can stay on it to a certain degree through the whole turn. Oops, once again, I braked very early there. I'm going to go for another lap here, because I feel like I can go faster and not mess up that one turn in the tunnel. So it looks like this should be faster in the first place, but we'll see. I think we can improve a little more here. 208, about 3 seconds faster with a mess up on one of the corners. you see there, a little finesse with the throttle makes a huge difference. It all comes together once you kind of figure out that balance. Flying down the back straight, 170. Whoosh. There, you can still have more time to brake there. Yeah, you can see how easy it is to turn this thing in, which is nice for such a heavy front axle. It's almost surprising, compared to the stock tune at least. Bottomed out there a little bit on that hill, but that's because it's a big hill. There we go, 204. That's a big improvement. So, anyway, you kind of get the idea. Take these tunes and play around with them. Obviously, a lot of different driving styles can be applied to this car. You know, it's not any universal setup, but I do think that even the slightest suspension tunes can really help this thing become a much more livable car. And I think, you know, overall, that's going to help you out quite a bit. Anyway, guys, hopefully this was helpful. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Give the tunes a try. Leave me some comments. Leave me feedback, constructive or otherwise. You know, keep in mind, everyone drives differently, so if these tunes don't feel great to you, then to each their own. But I think this did improve it to a point at least where you can modify it to be yours. Hopefully you can maybe start with mine and then fine tune it a little bit to be yours. But yeah, this is a great car. Shelby is very underrated. It's cheap. It's only 75,000 credits, I think. So very attainable. Lots of performance points behind that price point. And then even more so when you give it a few more parts. So play around with it. If you found some value here, consider liking and subscribing. I'm going to continue making more Gran Turismo videos, especially the tuning videos. I think these are going to be pretty helpful. I wish I had them back in the day when I was playing earlier iterations of this game. So we're going to continue on with this series. But anyway, thank you for your time. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.